me one more second. Our recording guy might not be here right now, so I'm gonna figure that out. And I have my hand up. Anthony or Andy, do either of you guys know how to do that? Because I've seen it. Oh, he's here. He's using a secret name. Okay. All right. That makes me feel better. All right. Incognito. Oh, we're recording now. Great. Okay. Do you want to start again? He said he's recording now. Okay. On behalf of District 24, please welcome our speaker, Debbie T. She's going to speak today on Tradition 6.
Okay. I just unmuted myself. Thank you. All right. Hi, everyone. I'm an alcoholic. My name is Debbie Temple. And hi, Jeff. And my sobriety date is April 29th, 1991, by the grace of God and the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous and the 36 Principles of Alcoholics Anonymous, our steps, traditions, and concepts. My home group, I still have to make a conscious effort to say what my home group is, and I'll explain that in a minute. My home group is the Mount Pocono group in the Poconos in Pennsylvania, northeastern Pennsylvania, area 59. And I am a past delegate, panel 55, where I served in northern New Jersey, area 44 for many, many years. And I got sober in area 44. Everything I learned about myself and Alcoholics Anonymous and going through the whole service structure was in area 44. So everything that I learned, the friends that I made, the service journey that I took, I have such an enormous, I'm going to cry already. I have such an enormous gratitude for Area 44. You know, my service sponsor used to always tell me, God rest his soul, John H., he was panel 43. He used to always tell me that you'll never appreciate Area 44 for how good an area it is until you go out of Area 44, you know, and see how other areas do things. And that's been my experience. Area 44 has a very good service structure. And so my husband retired 2 years ago, a little over 2 years ago, and we had been building a house here forever. And we decided finally when he retired that we would move here permanently. And we finally were able to move into the house that we had been building so long. And I had to start all over again, it felt like, in Alcoholics Anonymous. I had to find out, you know, where all the meetings were here. I felt like a newcomer. I felt like a fish out of water. It was very hard. So, you know, I was like 27 years sober, and it was just really hard, like to feel like a newcomer again. And not that I wasn't welcomed, I was, but everything here is very different. And then I had the challenge, once I got settled, I got a home group that welcomed me, the Mount Pocono group. Then I had to start learning about how Area 59 here in Eastern Pennsylvania conducts his business. And everything here, the service structure here is very, very different. And some I like better and some not so better. And I've been, you know, trying to, you know, work with the past delegates here and just, you know, learn how they do things here. So it's really good to be here. I want to thank Jimmy for passing on my name. I get quite a few requests with Jimmy's name behind it. So Jimmy's out there like putting people up to all this trouble. And I want to say hi to Mary Beth back there. Hi, Mary Beth. And Jeff, of course, great to see you, Jeff. And Mary Beth and Ruth, just really nice to see my friends here. Anyway, I was asked to share on Tradition 6 a little bit. I thought that I heard it said 70 minutes. I thought that's what Daniel said. When I was asked and told about 15, 20 minutes. So, so 70 minutes is a very long time to share on a tradition. So I'll share what I have, but it's not going to go anywhere near 70 minutes. I was not aware that I would be using that much time. But I will share what I have. I will share my experience. And then I guess we open it up to the floor for comments and questions. Okay. All right. So tradition 6, I will read the short form and then the long form, because the long form is so much better. There's so much more information in the long form. It explains a lot more, not only about the tradition, but the spirit of the tradition, where it comes from, the spirit behind it. And so I encourage anyone that's interested in the traditions or learning about the traditions to study the long form, because there's so much more information and you can learn so much more about it. So the short form of tradition 6 is: an AA group ought never endorse, finance, or lend the AA name to any related facility or outside enterprise, lest problems of money, property, and prestige divert us from our primary purpose. The long form, which says so much more, says problems of money, property, and authority may easily divert us from our primary spiritual aim. We think, therefore, that any considerable property of genuine use to AA should be separately incorporated and managed, thus dividing the material from the spiritual. An AA group, as such, should never go into business. Secondary aids to AA, such as clubs or hospitals, which require much property or administration, ought to be incorporated and so set apart that, if necessary, they can be freely discarded by the groups. Hence, such facilities ought not use the AA name. Their management should be the sole responsibility of those people who financially support them. For clubs, AA managers are usually preferred, but hospitals, as well as other places of recuperation, ought to be well outside AA and medically supervised. While an AA group may cooperate with anyone, such cooperation ought never to go so far as affiliation or endorsement, actual or implied. An AA group can bind itself to no one. So obviously, wow, right? There's a lot more in the long form. So, the first thing that I love about the long form, which is so important, I think it's basically the basis of this whole tradition, is where it talks about diverting us from our primary spiritual aim. Because in Alcoholics Anonymous, that's what we are. We are a spiritual movement. We are a spiritual organization where one alcoholic helps another, one alcoholic carries the message to the next, and we happen to need a service structure to make all that 12-step work possible. So we are in the business of saving lives and being a spiritual movement. And so that has to be our primary focus, and our primary aim is to stay within the spiritual. And we have to separate the spiritual from the business, the spiritual from the material. So right away, the long form talks about these things of money, property, and authority can divert us from our primary spiritual aim. Because obviously money, is something that there's always huge differences of opinion when it comes to money, where we should get it, how we should spend it. And so we have to be careful to remember that in our quest to be a spiritual movement and help another alcoholic, we happen to need money. It's an aside. I remember my service sponsor used to always say that what's most important and what is our primary purpose is helping another alcoholic, and within Alcoholics Anonymous, conducting meetings, having a district meeting so that we can get involved in 12-step work with committees, having a general service conference. We happen to need money for those things, but we are not in the money making business or the money seeking business. It's an aside that we happen to need money. Property, obviously, we need property to hold meetings and committee meetings and assemblies and conferences, but we can't own property. Authority, we know who the authority is, because it also says in that first sentence that authority could divert us from our primary spiritual aim. And so Alcoholics Anonymous is unique and like no other, because we don't have any authority other than what it says in tradition 2, right? That the ultimate authority is a loving God as he expresses himself in the group conscience. That's who our authority is. So, people are always like confused and like in disbelief, like when an outsider, so to speak, comes to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, a non-alcoholic, and they don't understand what AA is all about, and they want to speak to who's in charge, right? And so we usually smile and smirk to each other because we know that there's no one in charge. And so the technical right answer would say, well, who's in charge is a loving God, expressing himself in the group conscience. And so we don't have any authority, other than being led by our spiritual principles and our group conscience. And so we have to be careful that, we do have, a concept that talks about, authority, being given authority based on responsibility. And so that we get into the concepts with that. And so, that this tradition goes on to in the second sentence saying that, if we are involved with property, AA should be separately incorporated and managed, thus dividing the material from the spiritual. So again, like I said, AA cannot own property. Alcoholics Anonymous cannot own property. We should never go into business. Secondary aids to AA, such as clubs or hospitals, which require property, ought to be incorporated and so set apart. Okay, so clubs are usually a mess, are usually a nightmare in Alcoholics Anonymous, because the business of the club very often gets commingled with the business of what an AA group is supposed to be doing. And so a club can incorporate, but it's important that the club incorporate not having the AA name in it. That's very important. I've seen that mistake, with many clubs. It could be called, the Serenity Club of Alcoholics Anonymous. And that is not in keeping with this tradition. The club can incorporate and make sure that it doesn't have the AA name in it. And that's usually a mess, because AA groups that are renting space in a club is no different than an AA group that rents space in a church. We rent space, we pay rent, and then the way we conduct our business as an AA group really doesn't have anything to do with the church, other than obviously we have to abide by the church's rules and laws. We are a tenant, but we don't get involved with the church business. And so it's the same way in a club, that if a group is in a club, renting space in a club, the group's money should be separate from the club's money. This is always a nightmare, because the clubs tend to take on all the group's money. The group just kind of turns over all its money to the club. The club buys the coffee and literature and everything on behalf of the group, and everything gets commingled, and that's not the right way that it's supposed to work. They're supposed to be separate. A group is still supposed to be paying for its own coffee. A group is still supposed to be paying for its own literature, not the club. And so, that I think I was area chair when I was asked to go to two different clubs because some of the groups in the clubs were upset. Some of the group members were upset because they knew that there was problems and there was arguing, and there was power, control. And I went there, to two different clubs. I won't say the names, but I went to two different clubs several times to try and help them understand this tradition and to separate themselves from the club. And, there were some old timers that just did not want to let go, of the old ways, old ideas. And we really worked hard, with these groups to try and get them to see the way what their relationship should be with the club. And inevitably, we left really feeling like failure. Like I said, I think I was area chair at that time, alternate area chair, possibly even alternate delegate, and obviously I took a few area officers with me, and we were not successful, in helping them to separate themselves from the club. It was just so interwoven and so convoluted that they just felt like it was just too much, to get that going the right way. So clubs are, I'm hoping that maybe, I don't know, Jimmy and Jeff probably would know, I'm hoping, that things improved with those particular clubs in Area 44 as it relates to their relationship. But, I don't know. That's a big challenge. Let's see. And so for clubs, managers use hospitals as well as other places of recuperation or to be well outside AA, medically supervised. While an AA group may cooperate with anyone, okay, so here we talk about cooperation versus affiliation. Such cooperation ought never to go so far as affiliation or endorsement, actual or implied. AA group can bind itself to no one. So one of the first ways that I learned about what cooperation was and not affiliation was when I got sober, probably for the first at least 10 years, we were always hearing at meetings before the meeting, if you need a motor vehicle card, please see, the chairperson or the secretary. And so a lot of groups did not understand what that was. That's a very good example of how we can cooperate with an outside enterprise. They ask us, the court system can ask us to give out motor vehicle cards. It's the group's choice through the fourth tradition, through its own group autonomy. It's the group's choice whether they want to do that, whether they want to cooperate, which means that when if someone needs a motor vehicle card, we simply are there just to distribute that card. We're cooperating with that outside enterprise, but we're not affiliating in the sense that we can't explain, the court's policy. We can't get into explaining why they're doing what they're doing. We can't have an opinion of whether it's right or wrong. We're just simply cooperating. Any questions that they have, any problems that the person has in getting a motor vehicle card, they would need to go to the court, to ask those questions or express their concerns. Another thing I used to hear about those motor vehicle cards was, and it used to drive me crazy because I would hear that you have to wait till the end of the meeting, to get your motor vehicle card, which was a good thing, but that you have to be sober. And so obviously the court wants you to be sober. If you're in some kind of program, the court wants you to be sober. That's the whole point of why you're involved in something like that. But that's not our place in Alcoholics Anonymous. We welcome a sick and suffering alcoholic, that's having a problem with drinking or can't stop drinking. They're in a program with the courts. They're in legal trouble. That is not our call. That is not our business. And that is not our job to tell a potential alcoholic or a potential member of AA that you have to be sober to get the card. I used to get really like, how dare we? Because obviously they're coming to AA either because they're court mandated and they're required to, okay, and so maybe they don't want to be there, or maybe they're coming to AA because they really know that they have a problem and they want to stop drinking. And so what's the third tradition say? That the only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. And so that means that many who come into AA, hopefully, are still drinking. And so we can't tell them, we can't get involved in court business and say that you have to be sober. So, I've talked to many groups, after their meetings, and shared with them the inappropriateness of saying that you have to be sober. That's not our business. Our business is to help another alcoholic try and get sober and recover through the 12 steps. That's our business. That's our only business. And that leads into the fifth tradition. All of these traditions, intertwine and flow into each other. It reminds me of an event that my sponsor, she's a past delegate in Eastern Massachusetts, for Area 30, and she puts on this event. She's probably been doing it now for, I don't know, at least 15, maybe 15 years. Jeff would know better. He's been to many of them, and it's called the Incredible Tapestry. And it's a weekend event, and it's an event where AA members share their experience, strength, and hope in the steps, traditions, and concepts. And the whole purpose of the Incredible Tapestry weekend is to see how all our spiritual principles weave and flow, into each other, from one to the other. And so our traditions do that a lot. One tradition, flows into the next. And I love it. I love the name Incredible Tapestry. And I see how that works. So let me look at some of the stuff that I wrote. What I shared so far was just from my experience off the top of my head, what God put in my tongue and what I was inspired to say. Okay, so we flow into the sixth tradition after having looked at our primary purpose and singleness of purpose traditions in 1, 3, and 5. So if you want to really look at or learn, well, which of our traditions really focus on singleness of purpose or primary purpose? I mean, they all do, obviously, but 1, 3, and 5 in particular focus on our singleness of purpose, 1 being our common welfare. So our recovery depends on AA unity, meaning our common welfare, and singleness of purpose, 1 primary purpose, has a lot to do with that, common welfare. 3, obviously, because the only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. And so, again, the long form is so much better, because it not only talks about having a desire to stop drinking, but it really gets down to more of what our purpose is. And it says our membership ought to include all who suffer from alcoholism. And so that is very different than having a desire to stop drinking. It qualifies someone to be an AA member more and better by saying that you belong here. You absolutely are a member of Alcoholics Anonymous if you suffer from alcoholism. That's very different than having a desire to stop drinking. And so tradition 3 has very much to do with singleness of purpose. And tradition 5 focuses on the group, that our group has each AA group has but one primary purpose: to carry the message to its message. Excuse me, that's a very important little word there. Carry its message to the alcoholic who still suffers. And that means that each group has its own way of carrying the message through the tradition before that. Tradition 4 focuses on group autonomy, right? That each group can conduct its own AA business the way it sees fit through its group conscience, which goes back to tradition 2. So some groups, have open meetings, some groups have closed meetings, some groups have literature meetings, some groups, structure is totally different, spirit of rotation. But whichever way a group decides to conduct its business, as long as it's in keeping with tradition four, it has one primary purpose, though, no matter how it conducts its business, and that should be to carry its message, its meaning, the way it does business to the alcoholic who still suffers. Because it doesn't say each group has one primary purpose to carry the message. We know that the message is the 12 steps of recovery. Its message is how it carries the message. And so that's very much a singleness of purpose tradition. And so those previous traditions before six focus on that basic primary principle of singleness of purpose and primary purpose. Now we get into the sixth tradition, the short form, which is easier, says that AA group ought never endorse, finance, or lend the AA name to any related facility or outside entity. So the sixth tradition now is telling us what not to do. This is the first tradition that really, the first principle, because really none of the steps tell us what not to do, although they all tell us what not to do, but not in black and white. This tradition now is telling us what not to do, that we should not endorse, finance, or lend the AA name to any related facility or outside enterprise. And so that's interesting that it's telling us now what not to do. In the old days, our foundation was originally chartered for education, research, obviously before the traditions were written, before they were ratified by the fellowship. Education, research, at the time when we thought that we might even build or operate our own hospitals. So I'm sure a lot of you know the story of when Bill Wilson, wanted to, he was working with Dr. Silkworth with Towns Hospital, and, he wanted to take a few floors. He wanted to buy a building. He wanted to have a hospital. He wanted to have a rehab. He wanted to have a detox. He wanted to have counseling services. He wanted to be the boss. He wanted to get paid, because they all, were telling him, all the AA members, those early AAs, Bill, you're always broke. You don't have any money. You don't have any food to eat. It's not fair. You work so hard, you should get paid. And Bill thought, they're right. Damn it, I should get paid. And, he went back to, his committee, so to speak, his people that were, with him in those early days. And they had some heated discussions, and they said that, Bill, you're going in the wrong direction. This is going to hurt AA. We can't go into business, and we can't do any of that kind of stuff, because we're going to get away from, our primary purpose. And so Bill, learned through listening to the group conscience that the group conscience is very wise. He knew that they were right. He knew he had to let go of those grandiose ideas. And, I love my service sponsor used to always, use this phrase that, and it says it in that tradition, that sometimes the good is the enemy of the best. Some of those ideas were good, but they were the enemy of what's best, for AA as a whole. Good ideas sometimes work against what's best. And so, because Bill had these ideas, these big ideas, some of the groups, were taking on the same ideas, that they can get involved, in other types of business other than just carrying the message, that maybe a group could, get involved with a detox, or a group could get involved with a rehab. And so that was dangerous, because, the groups were starting to get big ideas too. But fortunately, Bill had the wisdom to surrender to the group conscience. Our vision then and what we could do was endless, with the best of intentions. Again, it was the good being the enemy of the best. We could save the world. We tested the waters, but we soon saw that the basic principle of one alcoholic helping another could never be commingled with any sort of business venture. Again, it's separating the spiritual from the material. We could not turn our 12-step work into a business. AA as such, ought never be organized. We were getting into trouble and had to get back to basics. This is when we removed the AA name from clubhouses because we cannot endorse a related enterprise, related meaning having something to do with alcoholism. So again, like I said, there were some clubhouses in those early days that took on the AA name. They saw the danger in that they need to remove AA's name from a club business, especially the club being incorporated if it was. And so they actually removed the AA name from some of those early clubhouses because they saw that was an endorsement. It was AA basically sending the message that we endorse this clubhouse. What happens if that clubhouse is involved in all kinds of activity that's not in keeping with our AA principles? AA's name, we would be endorsing some activities that are not in keeping, with our steps and our traditions. So fortunately, this tradition took care of that an AA, a clubhouse, and we really shouldn't even be calling them AA clubhouses, although we do. They're clubhouses that happen to house AA meetings. It's like we shouldn't be calling AA dances, because AA does not put on dances. AA members, people who happen to be members of Alcoholics Anonymous, can put on dances, but we shouldn't attach the AA name to those either. Like we shouldn't attach the AA name to clubhouses. So it's a slippery slope. A lot of people will say, oh, what's the big deal, calling it an AA dance? Because it sends a very dangerous message. It sends a wrong message. God knows what could go on, in a dance. God only knows what could go on in a clubhouse. Clubhouses can have games being played and card games and gambling and all kinds of things. We can't attach ourselves, we can't affiliate, with these kind of activities and these kind of events because it sends a bad message to the public, of what AA is all about. See what else I have. An AA member should never individually endorse an outside enterprise. For example, let's say an AA member works for a rehab. Okay, so now we're talking about an AA member being careful to wear two different hats at the right time. If a person is paid by their employer to give a presentation to the public on alcohol prevention, that is absolutely fine if they wear that one hat as a professional, and they should not identify themselves as a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. So we could be a member of AA, but in our professional life, we have a reason to be asked to give a talk, to some organization. We're giving that talk as a professional. We should put the professional hat on and just keep to whatever business was asked of us to talk about, whatever the subject was, and not mix in our membership of Alcoholics Anonymous. Exactly the opposite applies when an AA member is sitting in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous and they happen to work in a rehab. We should not be bringing in that job as a counselor or whatever business they're in, whatever type of position they have in that rehab or detox or whatever it might be that's related to alcoholism. That AA member should just be sitting in an AA meeting, talking about their drinking, talking about recovery, talking about the 12 steps or their service experience, and not be bringing in their professional life, their professional experience into that AA meeting, because other organizations, they do business very, very differently than we do. Detoxes, rehabs, they do different type of business. They, they share things that are not in keeping, with our 12 steps of recovery. And that's their right, to teach their clients, whatever they see fit. But if their way of doing business is different than how we conduct our business in AA through our 12 steps, a professional should not be bringing that into an AA meeting. So that's important. My best friend, worked for, and Jeff and Jimmy know her. My best friend worked for a rehab, and she worked in the alcoholism recovery field for many, many years. And she was so careful, and so good at in an AA meeting, only talking, about AA stuff. If you knew her for years, you might not know even where she works, because she would not hurt AA by bringing in her professional life into a meeting. And I'm sure that she didn't bring a lot of her AA business into her job, although being an AA member and being in recovery is very advantageous if you're, get involved in that field. So we have to be careful, with that. The problem here is also breaking anonymity and gets into tradition 11. If they do identify themselves as an AA member, if they're giving a public talk, which is not what we're supposed to do, right? We're supposed to keep our anonymity through tradition 11 at the level of press, radio, and films and TV and internet and everything else. If we identify ourselves as an AA member when we're giving a professional talk, this is another example of diverting us from our primary purpose through endorsement and even financing. So we have to be careful also with anonymity. So that covers a little bit of the, endorsement, not endorsing outside enterprises. It also talks about not financing outside enterprises. And I like to use simple examples of how an AA group can endorse, could finance an outside enterprise. A lot of groups, well-meaning, absolutely well-meaning, because they're so grateful for the space that they rent, or for the money that they donate to the church. They're so grateful for their church or club or wherever they're meeting, community center, that they give money out of their seventh tradition basket to the church. I'll use a church as an example. So let's say the church doesn't have a lot of money, and the church is desperate for needing new chairs. How many times have I heard, groups take money out of their seventh tradition basket and give that money to the church to buy new chairs? That is absolutely financing an outside enterprise. And like I said, it's well-meaning. A lot of AA groups, my old home group, is one of them, that met in a church for many, many, many years, 20, 25 years. And of course, we're going to have a good relationship, with that church. And of course, we're going to want to help. But we cannot take money that violates, I don't like to use the word violate, but that's not in keeping with the seventh tradition. Again, it's weaving into another tradition. We don't take AA's money, we don't take seventh tradition basket money and give that to a church to help them build something, fix something, buy something. The church needs to be doing that through its own affairs, through its own congregation members, in its own way. If the group members want to help the church, group members can, on the side, they can get together, not in a business meeting. They can get together before a meeting, after a meeting. They can get together at the diner, on the phone. And as individual people, they can say, let's take up a collection, and if we can get together a few $100, take it out of our pockets and give it to the church, then that's fine because it's not coming from an AA group's seventh tradition basket. So that's a simple, simple example of how we should not finance outside enterprises. Basically, it's about the seventh tradition, that the only thing that we should be using AA basket money, and I don't want to get too much into the seventh tradition because I know I have someone behind me. Oh, Jimmy has seventh tradition, I guess next week. So I don't want to steal his thunder. The only thing that we should be using AA money for is for AA related matters, something to do with the meeting or service, involved service structure issues. And let's see. So lastly, I have an AA group. I'm looking at the time. It's 10 to 4. Lastly, an AA group should not affiliate itself with an outside enterprise. I kind of covered this with the club thing. This means that a group should not have a name like Wednesday Night St. Michael's Group. This drives me crazy when groups take on the name of the church. Oh, what's your home group? Oh, my home group is the St. Joe's meeting. No, it's not. That's where you meet. That's the facility in which you meet. That is not the name of your group. That is directly not in keeping with this tradition. That is absolute, affiliation. Your home group ought to be the Serenity Group or Practicing the Principles Group, or something like that. Keeping it simple group. Your home group is not the St. Joseph's meeting. And so that is a no-no. And so if you know anyone who belongs to a home group that uses the church's name, please ask them to stop doing that, to not do that, because that is, like I said, pure affiliation. And so I wrote, a group should never include the church name in which it meets. So all these things, endorsing, financing, lending the AA name, are dangerous because they divert us from our primary purpose. We have to divide the spiritual from the material. And so all of this all leads back, and it always does. It leads back to tradition one. All the traditions lead back to tradition one, which is that our common welfare should come first. Our common welfare has to come first. What's best for AA as a whole, that has to come first, because our recovery depends on the unity and common welfare of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I just heard, I was on a step and tradition workshop. I was telling Jimmy before the meeting, two mentors of mine, and he was giving a talk on the traditions. And he said, there's really only one tradition. And I thought it was interesting the way he put it. He said, there's really only one tradition. The one tradition really is about our common welfare in terms of needing to stay unified, that we have to, focus on unity. And that's our common welfare, because all the other traditions that come after that, traditions 2 through 12, they all focus on and are in the spirit of how we implement and how we work, in that first tradition. How do we look to stay in keeping with our common welfare? How do we, constantly be careful that we're focusing on unity? The rest of the traditions basically share with us how we do that. So I thought that was interesting, to hear him say that there's really only one tradition, and the rest of the traditions talk about how we keep our common welfare. So that's all that I have. I hope I took up enough time. I want to thank you guys for listening and for your patience. And it's always nice to see the little nodding of the heads. And thank you for allowing me to share. Thank you to District 24 for asking me. Thank you, Jimmy. And I'm just so happy to see my friends.